As Trump was sworn into office for the second time on January 20th, 2025, it seemed everything about his demeanor had changed from his first term. In 2016, he and Melania were all smiles, while she was dressed in a classic light blue dress reminiscent of Jackie Kennedy's remarkable style. This time around, she wore a black dress that looked like a trench coat. With a white-rimmed hat that covered most of her face, she looked more like the main character from V for Vendetta than she did the traditional First Lady. Or perhaps, more to the point, she looked like a 1920s gangster standing next to her husband. All while Chris Macchio, of Italian descent, sang the national anthem in his operatic tenor. The whole scene had massive Godfather Day of Vengeance vibes. Retributive justice, it would seem, is back on the menu. The vibe everyone noticed was quite different. If Trump's first term betrayed any naivete about what the inner workings of Washington, D.C. was really like, the second term was all about payback. Call it a vendetta or an evening of the score, but Trump has not forgotten the people who wielded the judiciary to engage in lawfare against him. And not just him, but the American people whom he represents. As he has been fond of saying, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, I'm just in the way. He certainly has not forgotten about that day in July 2024 when a bullet ripped through his ear in Butler, Pennsylvania, or all of the many security protocols which were broken or ignored to put him in that precarious situation in the first place. Nessun Dorma, the song from the payback ending scene in Sum of All Fears that Trump had played at the Republican National Convention just days after the assassination attempt, may as well have been playing during the first days of Trump's second term in office. When you consider the first executive orders that Trump issued on day one, the message seems loud and clear. Trump will do what he can to roll back much of the 20th century policies that brought about the disintegrating and divided America we've all inherited. As he laid out in his inauguration speech, it's time to recapture the American spirit of greatness. Trump has also handpicked a very different sort of team this time as well. For example, Pete Hegseth was just confirmed as Secretary of Defense, the tie-breaking vote cast by none other than Vice President J.D. Vance, which means that the man with a Crusader cross on his chest will play a leading role in directing the nation's armed forces. Hegseth, who wrote Battle for the American Mind, is poised to demolish DEI practices in the armed services. Though this confirmation is yet to take place at the time of this recording, Kash Patel could well be confirmed as director of the FBI. And then there's Tom Homan, whom Trump appointed as border czar, who has already deported over 300 illegal immigrants on day one of Trump's new term. Speaking of immigration, one of Trump's first executive orders declared that ongoing leaky borders constitute an invasion across the southern border of the United States, and that his cabinet would take appropriate action to repel, repatriate, or remove any alien engaged in the invasion. Another order allows U.S. military service members to act as Border Patrol officers as part of Trump's mass deportation program. In so doing, Trump essentially declared the migrant flow as a national security threat, thus allowing him to utilize armed forces to assist in shutting it down. He also suspended refugee arrivals, stopped birthright citizenship, restarted border wall construction, and created the Homeland Security Task Force in all 50 states, which will allow local law enforcement officers to put an end to the presence of criminal cartels, foreign gangs, and transnational criminal organizations. Among other things, Trump also directed the Secretary of State to apply sanctions against any nation that didn't fully cooperate with the deportation and return of its citizens. He ordered that sanctuary cities be federally defunded, stopped all funding to NGOs that were assisting in any way with bringing in immigrants, and he designated international cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, effectively declaring war on them too. Economically, Trump is adding an external revenue service with the intent of increasing tariffs on imports and encouraging companies to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. He said he would push for a rewrite of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which would include 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods. Trump also promised to increase tariffs on China, and during his campaign, he said that they could be as high as 60%. One order aimed to halt the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. from Canada, Mexico, and China, while another significant measure bars any U.S. government official from pressuring social media companies to combat mis- or disinformation. On the energy front, Trump promised to drill baby drill in the U.S., which included a declaration of America's national energy emergency. The U.S., Trump ordered, would withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, which committed the U.S. to drastically reduce its policies related to carbon emissions. Energy projects will be encouraged, while all of Biden's EV incentives will be ended. In a clever move, many suspect that by changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, Trump was circumventing previous orders to stop drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. While there were many other orders, a few bear mentioning. First, Trump pardoned the hundreds of people indicted or imprisoned because of the events on January 6, 2020 at the U.S. Capitol. He also pardoned and freed the abortion activists who were sentenced for praying outside abortion clinics. Second, Trump declared there would be only two recognized genders by the U.S. government, male and female, and that all executive branch departments or agencies had 60 days to eliminate DEI programs, including the elimination of all chief diversity officer jobs. He also terminated Lyndon Johnson's longstanding executive order from nearly 60 years ago that set anti-discrimination requirements for government hiring. If we can measure anything by this first wave of executive orders, it seems that Trump intends to make a serious war against the civil rights, immigration, and energy policies that came to dominate the 20th and early 21st centuries. Those on the left, of course, were furious. One prominent figure on X said, quote, "Walking back progress from 60 years ago is utterly bleeping insane," end quote. To which another person retweeted and said, quote, "We're repealing the entire 20th century. I hope you're ready," end quote. In any case, it seems the progressivism of the left is under attack in Trump's second term. In this episode of the King's Hall podcast, we want to talk about why this is such a big opportunity for the builders, adventurers, and risk takers of America, and especially for those of us on the dissident right. For the first time in our lifetimes, we have the tailwinds behind us and in our favor. The question is what we'll do with these favorable winds. It's hardly the time to sit on our hands. Instead, it's time to pursue our vision for America with all of the strength and vigor we can muster. We'll take a deeper dive into some of these executive orders, talk about why they matter, and finally, we'll discuss some of the biggest economic and political blunders of the 20th century that should be destroyed. The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world.
Hola y bienvenido al espectáculo, Brian.
I thought they were all going back.
Oh, I thought this was
now
a
you're
different
going
show.
back.
Guys, welcome to the King's Hall podcast.
What just happened?
We're trying to be multicultural.
You pick this week to be multicultural. The first week in our entire lifetimes when Trump almost swooped in the room.
I know.
And bodily removed you onto a C-130 to be airdropped over Mexico City.
Yeah, it is actually interesting because the way I pronounce that, I know a lot of our Spanish listeners will be like, I think Eric could be from Mexico. That's how good it was.
Wow.
Are those the footprints of ice that I hear?
I already called it. I've got them on speed dial.
Wait, I heard a rumor. It's not true, probably. $750 for any tips.
I've got one of those letters of marque.
I mean, let's just say we could measure our friendship based on that. $750.
Have you seen?
We're going to have a competition, an office competition.
I get the other one deported.
I'm sure you've seen the reels, but there's one and it's a guy and he's like fake crying. And he's like, I'm so sad that they're going to deport people because my mother-in-law who lives at this address is not a legal
I'm worried about
citizen.
her.
Donald Trump won, and I am very, very afraid that he might deport my mother-in-law. She entered illegally to the country, and she lives in Street 4, number 47, apartment D, New York. I am very, very concerned. That's right behind the green apartment. Yeah. I have nothing bad happened to her. The gate is always open. You don't have any dogs either. Street 4, number 47, apartment B.
I'm so worried. Again, she lives at 1374 Concord, apartment 17B. I hope they don't get her.
Oh, man. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Brian Sauvé.
So good to be here, Eric.
Not Spanish, but French.
No, not Spanish. Better. Some of the time. Era dependent. Like
Era,
right
yes.
now, not better.
Okay.
Recently, still not better. Medium term history, still not better. But in the deep past, yeah, better.
Better.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Burkholder, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. I'm not going to talk about my peoples. They converted to Christianity, a warrior society converted to Christianity, and now they're really gay.
Basically Germans.
No, basically not. Not Germans.
They are very gay now. I can't.
Yeah.
Again, we're in the same boat.
Yep.
We're in the same boat.
But I'm American.
Yeah, that's the thing. America.
I'm proud to be an American.
Yeah, hang on.
At least I know I'm free.
Let's talk about Eric Cohen's past. Okay.
Oh no.
Okay.
Here we go.
How about that? If we're going to constantly be getting French jokes, how about we talk about that, Eric?
No, certain people in their lives. That's not.
Okay.
That is not my
All
last
right.
name.
See.
Okay, so here we go with being an American.
That was a Trump negotiation. He's changing the subject. You hit us with a 10-pound hammer. I hit you with a freaking ICBM.
ICBM. That's what I do.
Anyway,
I just want you guys to
continue.
know all the deportations going on.
Yeah.
What we were sending some text. You saw the Sicario mode is basically on. We'll get into some of that in a minute. The cartels were shooting at Border Patrol. So everybody on Twitter was saying, well, they were sharing it with like clips of Sicario. And I sent one of these to our group chat at NCP. And Ben said, I love when Eric goes in his Sicario arc. And I said, that's my secret, Ben. I'm always in the Sicario arc. One of the things I did think was interesting, it was making the rounds, was Selena Gomez crying about all of her people.
Yeah.
Being deported. And I saw a really interesting comment. Somebody said, it's amazing when push comes to shove, how quickly people can identify who their people are. And so I think a lot of this, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of this question of, we've talked about Christian nationalism, but I think this pressing question after 60 years of civil rights, this is still not settled in America about what is an American? What does it mean to be a part of this nation? It seems like there's still a lot of unrest about this.
Yeah, not only is there a lot of unrest, people are experiencing this new sensation who have been on the left, where they've been for decades. I mean, going on 50, 60 years at this point, attempting to carve out essentially like the barrio in America. And I'm like a barrio American, and I'm like a African American, and I'm an Italian American, and I'm all these hyphenated Americans. And for the first time in our lifetime, certainly, the left is experiencing the sensation of being resisted, and someone going, "Oh, you're crying? I don't care." In fact, when Selena Gomez was crying, it really touched my heart. And I don't mean that it moved me to her position, but it warmed my heart to see her in pain. And
did you see the meme, by the way? It was like Selena Gomez crying, and then right underneath it was the picture of Barron Trump.
He's like,
bring it on.
Let me see it. No, that's what's happening right now. And to the point where the nothing ever happens bros who are like, nothing's ever going to change. I get why they're there. Like the conservatives are never going to do anything. Trump's not really going to do anything. Even if he gets elected, it's just going to be immediate deep state stuff again. Like, I get why they're there, because that has genuinely been all of our experience, especially millennials. You could even say like Gen X and under. That's been our whole life, politically and culturally. But it's actually been so like almost euphoric and incredible to be able to see like JD Vance say, I don't really care, Margaret. It was like his frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn moment. His Rhett Butler moment.
Living here.
I don't really care, Margaret.
Is that?
It's just a new Gone with the Wind.
That's okay. I was going to say
Gone with the Wind.
Casablanca.
It's just a sensation that neither the conservatives nor the left has experienced yet. And so, hopefully we see them stay the course and they continue to basically what we need to do. We've been saying this for months at the King's Hall now. It's like we need to recover the national self-will, the national will to be, the national will to defend our people, the national will to exist as a distinct people and not be subsumed into globalist, hegemony and multiculturalist goo, where everybody else is allowed. Selena's allowed to say, "Oh, my people who are Mexicans being deported. That's your people, Selena." Well, then guess what? You're not an American.
Yeah.
In fact, I will go on record, Selena. I will pay for your plane ticket to go to any city, any major airport in Mexico, one way only. I'll pay for the ticket out of pocket. I won't even expense it to New Christendom Press. This is my personal gift to you. If you want to be repatriated to your people, I'm willing to facilitate that. Go ahead and email us. You can find our info on the website.
That's a really generous offer.
People have told me many times, Brian, your main weaknesses are that you love too much, you care too much, you give too much. And I agree. Those are my some of my biggest weaknesses.
That is a real weakness. Speaking of the spirit of American greatness, it kind of reminds me of a conference.
I knew it.
I knew it. Maybe somebody I know is hosting. Maybe you could tell me just a little bit about this thing that I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the upcoming New Christendom Press 2025 Summer Conference.
No way.
It's called Safety Third, Recovering the American Will to Greatness.
What?
Where we're attempting to reinvigorate the American spirit of the American settler and the American founding and all of these great moments in American history where our mettle and our people were approved. And,
like
and
the
we need to get back to that.
1964 Civil Rights Amendment. Civil Rights Act, right?
We're looking for a new speaker to replace Eric Kahn.
That's right. Eric will be replaced.
No, but it's
by an H1B.
June 12th to the 14th. By an H1B? Absolutely not. June 12th to the 14th.
Yes.
newchristendompress.com/2025 2025. Where you can find ticket information. I'm going to be putting on a concert. We're going to have. Can we announce our speakers? Are they confirmed?
Yeah, we're
going to have Dr. Wolf out. I don't know if you've heard of him. Dr. Stephen Wolf, the man, the myth, the legend, is coming out of his woodland. He's emerging from the forests where he normally dwells, and he's coming to Ogden, Utah, to speak at our conference. Along with, why don't you tell us about some others? Guys?
Andrew Isker. The Boniface option, Dan.
The 8th century.
I think really technically your people.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Mr. Isker, I'm pretty sure he doesn't need an axe to chop down a tree. He could just use like a chop.
He could use his own
bare hands. He could just rip the tree out, with his bare hands.
Yeah, so that'll be exciting. We have some panel speakers as well that are going to join us. CJ Engel, J. Chase Davis. So really excited for those guys to be there. And I think, Brian, a lot of this is about recognizing the moment that we're in.
Yeah.
This idea. Oh, and lest I forget, Joel Wevin.
Yeah, I was about to say Joel.
I
wasn't
sure if he didn't sign the contract or something.
Joel is going to be furious if he knows.
Joel's in.
We should just cut that out. We should just cut out and just remain a mystery. If Joel's in or out.
We've asked a lot of people. Everyone said no. I don't know who we'll possibly get. And then later we announce, but Joel said yes. No, our main guy, Joel, he's going to be speaking. And this was kind of one of the things that he pointed out to us in recent discussions, was just the idea of Christians have always had the headwinds against them. What do you actually do when you have a strong tailwind? And I think you're seeing that there's a lot of people in the Christian camp, they'll actually self-detonate at the moment when you can win. We've talked about this before, but purity spiraling and stuff like this. So how do you actually be in a position to win? And to Brian's point, I think a lot of it actually comes down to the will. You have to recover the will. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, and you will see in this episode with the executive orders, and people are, kind of memeing this, but it's like, you can just do things. When the woke journalist lady starts crying about the deportations, you can just say, frankly, Margaret, I don't care. I don't want them in my country. And then you move on. And it's funny because they actually don't know what to do. So that will be really big. The conference, June 12th through 14th in Ogden, Utah. You can go to newchristendompress.com. I think it's /2025.
Yep.
Well, you can sign up today. We'll have even more information forthcoming on that. One other plug I wanted to give, because I think it's really important. Dan, we've been listening to a series from Isaac Botkin from T-Rex Arms, one of our friends. They were kind enough to send us some holsters. So we've been holstering the firearms in T-Rex holsters. So if you get a chance, check out their holsters. Really high quality product. Love those guys. But Isaac has a multi-part series on the ATF and Ruby Ridge, Waco, that we would encourage people to check out because a lot of what he talks about in there is the failure of the New Deal and how that moment changed America forever. And it's tied to overregulation, big government, et cetera. So that would be a good thing to check out.
Yeah, it's a fascinating deep dive. He actually goes into the prohibition as well and that whole movement of government overreach. You can listen to it at T-Rex Labs on YouTube or T-Rex Talks on whatever podcasts service you use. So it's really, really good, really fascinating deep dive. A lot of primary sources, really good.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful because as you dig into these executive orders and you dig into really all these government organizations, things like non-government organizations as well, like the Fed.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about things like we need to end some of this, we need to repeal a lot of the things that happened in the 20th century, your average American, your grill American is going to think, but we've always had those things. And so I think it's important to know the history so you can go back and say, actually, we haven't always had those things. And in fact, as Trump pointed out when in his talk about ending income tax, which is tied to the Fed, he was saying actually America's most prosperous days as a nation were in the late 1800s before the Fed was created, which I think is 1913.
1913.
Yep.
You know what's crazy about that, time period right around 1913 is that there was this little boat called the Titanic. I don't know if you've heard of this.
What?
And there were a lot of people on the Titanic who actually would have resisted the implementation of the Federal Reserve.
Are you sure it was actually the Titanic that sank?
Well, are we?
Funny.
I think we need a Haunted Cosmos or a King's Hall on this.
Yes.
Where it's like there is so much surrounding the 20th century policies that got us to where we are. The Fed being the monetary policy being very much central,
and also how they were
policy.
publicized.
Mm-hmm.
I think is a huge part of this.
Yeah, like what they were saying this is going to be and what it will do.
Well, like in public school, like I remember, hearing about Rhodesia and, them talking about like, oh, it's just this racist country in Africa, like the worst people on earth. And then later in life, you start reading about it and you're like, give me Rhodesia or give me
like,
death.
when you say the worst people on earth, do you mean all the people that destroyed Rhodesia, right?
Yes.
not the Rhodesians. Like you mean the Zimbabweans.
Yes. Well, so, and maybe this is a good place to start. As we start thinking about, Dan, this concept of repealing the 20th century, people are taking notice that is a lot of what the executive orders are aimed at. Why do you think Americans would be in a place where they're willing now to accept the repeal of an entire century's worth of legislation? Like how you couldn't get Trump doing this if there wasn't public sentiment that had its eyes opened to the problems. But how did we get here? How do we get to the point where people actually want that to happen?
That's a big question and a really good question. I think if you just look at so we've identified that there's a vibe shift, right? It's towards Christianity. It's towards loving your people and loving your place and saying, I don't care anymore about your DEI stuff, about your PC stuff. I don't care anymore. Well, what led to that point where essentially people broke? And they said, I'm not tolerating this anymore. I'm not playing your games anymore. Because for decades, many, many decades, probably since the 1960s and even before that, you've had this government overreach into essentially causing you to hate your people, hate your place, and hate yourself, and trying to remove the will to live. And the thing is, you can only go so long with telling somebody that they do not actually deserve to be alive or to exist or to have certain rights and privileges within their own country. And you have foreigners that are coming in and taking your jobs, and you can't feed your family. And you're looking at the housing crisis, and you're looking at how income hasn't changed. You know, we've talked before. It sounds like fussing. It's really not. It's just identifying reality where our fathers in the baby boomer generation, they get their job, you know, and they're making $35,000, $40,000 a year, and they paid $20,000 for their house, or shuffle the numbers around. Their income per year was greater than the cost of their house in many cases. And now, if you just look at income versus housing prices, I mean, if you get a six-figure job, you're making $100,000. You're doing really well, right?
No.
Where are you going to find a house for less than $400,000 in any major city across the United States? Even smaller towns, it's getting more difficult to just live. And so I think people are just fed up. They're just done. And so this repealing of the 20th century, I think the time is right because people are just done. They're sick of it.
Well, I also think a big part of this is after World War II, you get a lot of the open society ideas that become part of the post-war consensus. So even if you're a quote unquote conservative, you're pushing things like the, global international trade, kind of this malleable borders, malleable peoples, multiculturalism, all of those things. And I think what happened is for a long time, people were not really awake to that play.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think what happened, the globalist elites really overplayed their hand in 2020. And I think because they did that, the open society, people started reading about it. They started reading about Klaus Schwab, and he's borrowing the ideas from other people in the early 20th century. So people start pushing back against this. And I think you're right, Dan, that the average grill American, where it really hits them is when they realize we're up a creek without a paddle financially. I can go to work, and if you make the average American income, it's like $55,000 a year. But if you factor in that a house costs $400,000 or $500,000, you've completely reversed it, where a house was less than your annual salary to many times up to 10 times as much as your annual salary.
And if you calculate the true cost of purchasing that house,
oh yeah,
a $500,000 house purchased with today's interest rates on a 30-year mortgage is more like $1.8 million.
Correct.
By the time you're done paying it.
Plus, because housing prices have gone up, that means property taxes go up.
Right.
And it's not just that, it's energy prices, which we'll talk about. How about eggs right now? Like you can't buy eggs.
Right.
My wife was running around to different grocery stores the other day, even though I have chickens.
Like 100 chickens.
It's the end of January. They don't lay.
They don't like
many
laying in
eggs.
January in Utah.
Right.
Yeah, but they're crazy expensive, and they taste like garbage.
So I think that affects.
It's incredible.
That affects a lot of people.
Get mad.
And then I also think, actually, right now, what we're dealing with inflation wise is the OOs. So you think of George W. Bush and then Obama. We have the economic crisis of 2008. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all that stuff's going on. But it's interesting to note that government spending went through the roof after 2008. So Obama's way of handling a financial crisis was let's spend more money on government employees. It's also interesting financially because I think it's the year 2000, the US actually had a surplus, not a deficit. And now we run like a $1.8 trillion per year deficit. So you're looking at that, and financially, it's just like you think of a household. When you overspend, there comes a point where you got to pay the creditors, right?
Yeah.
You've got to deal with this problem that you've created. All the spending was fun. And so now I think the average American, when they find out things like that the average government employee annual salary is $150,000 and they're living in squalor and can barely afford to live. How do you afford a car? I mean, new vehicles are like $80,000, $90,000. How are you going to afford the basics? anyway, I think that's part of why people are fed up. We've watched what our politicians have done. And I think Trump has done a really good job of understanding that resentment.
Mhm.
I think, as you said in the cold open, Brian, that he now understands what the deep state is really about. These are genuinely wicked, awful, evil people. And I think one of the wills, Brian, that we've got to recapture is the will to crush our enemies. People don't realize this. And if you look at the history of the world, there are people that have to meet God. And that's the way that they have to be dealt with. And the people who have done evil things, we've got to have a different strategy than the quasi-pietistic, lame evangelical response that we've heard.
And so much of that lame, quasi-pietistic evangelical response relies upon this, again, 20th century innovative, novel theological apparatus that creates a complete confusion when it comes to what the state is and ought to do, what a nation is and ought to do in terms of its government of itself, and the duties of an individual and a private individual when it comes to their own neighbor in the context of their life, the people God puts in front of them in providence. So much of this relies upon people saying, well, America is basically just like a private individual who must turn the other cheek and it's like, no, hang on. Let's go back to those texts like Romans chapter 13, where Paul says that God raises up the civil minister, the deacon of the state, to bear the sword of retributive justice to destroy enemies of the good. That's what it's doing. It's supposed to, when people come in and they act wickedly or they attempt to invade and destroy the land.
It's not a matter of personal retaliation.
No, the president, he's not permitted to say, like, this is how justice works when it comes to the state and the civic and the judicial realm. You're not allowed as a good ruler to say, I will not enforce justice because I'm so nice. I'm so kind. No, you're not being kind. You're hating the very people that you were called to love as a father and a city father and a national father.
Well, even the picture of Lady Justice, right? The statue where she's blindfolded, she has scales and a sword.
Yeah.
That's a picture of, yeah, that's right.
She weighs things. This, in many ways, this moment in America, it reminds me, I think there are parallels and some rhyming with the end of the Soviet era. Like the USSR is just absolute juggernaut when it's established, largely, in many ways with the help of Western aid coming out of World War II, in America and Western powers basically ensuring that the USSR would gain a huge amount of territory in Europe, that they would have a lot of military aid, that we wouldn't attack or harm them in any way. And we set up this basically, decades-long nuclear stalemate and standoff of mutually assured destruction. Well, meanwhile, under the Iron Curtain in the USSR, they're undertaking China might have a similar scale here, but you could argue in the USSR, the largest brainwashing propaganda campaign in the history of mankind through every aspect of institution, of education, government, of all of life is swallowed up in this communist regime that presents there are no gods but the state, basically, and the state is never wrong, and the state is the party, and the party exists to serve the people, but the people are the party. But actually, really, there's about 10 to 20 Politburo members at the top who are gods in the land, and they get all these special privileges and absolute power and control. They're just little gods in the land. But what happens over time is that it doesn't work. Again, it's legislating water to run uphill. The whole system is violating all sorts of principles of natural law that God has worked in basically every part of law that the Lord has worked into his creation. And so the people over time, it becomes an open secret that it's all lies, that the party is a sham, that communism doesn't work, that we're really not out competing America. Why does America have supermarkets abounding with food? And we have television shows celebrating the harvest coming in. America doesn't do that because it's like they always have enough bread. But in the USSR, it's like an event. Oh, the state has provided you with, oh, look, your bread, it's coming in, And it's like,
Give us this day our daily bread.
Yeah, pretty soon though, one of those sides, like the USSR, they had to make it illegal for their people to leave and come and visit the West because they would stay. They wouldn't no Soviet citizen, if their whole family could move to the West and see what it was like, would have been like, I'll take communism. Pretty much nobody. Like we were constantly poaching their agents and their people from their intelligence apparatus. They're, coming in under the control of Western intelligence, moving, becoming double, but it didn't go the other way. There weren't a lot of Americans who were choosing, I'll go live in communist Russia. So over time, there was a moment where if you sliced it and just stepped into, let's say, 1950s USSR, what does the average communist citizen think? Well, they'd have been like, it's inevitable. This is what life is. This is what it always has been. This is what it always will be. We're ascendant. We're powerful. But as it weakens over time, that there's an undercurrent of mass popular hidden where it's not yet, it's still against the blasphemy law. If they come out against it, they will still be instantly killed in that case, right? They come out and say the state's evil, right? Down with the Kremlin. They would be instantly killed. People in America felt that way, particularly in an accelerating fashion from the 2000s through 2020, 2022. It was like at the peak, if you say the wrong thing, you will lose your job, your livelihood, you will be canceled forever. You'll be hated and despised by all mankind, rejected by your kinsmen, and you will be a pariah and an outcast forever. And they were leveraging all of the massive power of cultural institutions and the state and media and all of these communist bought institutions to try and destroy the American people and suppress them from saying what we all knew for a long time, which was that DEI and political correctness and all this was absolute garbage. It was lies. What's happened is that we reached that tipping point, like what happened in the USSR, where it looks strong until all of a sudden it cracks and it falls over and it goes to dust. And I think in a different way, but it's analogous, we're at this moment in American history where all of a sudden the Iron Dome has been lifted from you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to think that. You're not allowed to post that on your Facebook. We're going to cancel you. You're going to lose your job. And now all of a sudden you have a strong nationalistic leader who stands up and says, actually, not only can you say that thing that you weren't allowed to say, all of the people who said you couldn't, I'm going to destroy them. Well, I'm going to fire them. I am going to make them a pariah. And that's what you need to do. No half measures, which is why it's so refreshing to see Trump do things like with the DEI. No relabeling it. You can't take your DEI department and say, oh, this is actually, I'm not the chief diversity officer. I'm the chief strategy marketing officer. Like, no. If 30 days ago you were the DEI guy, you're out.
You're gone. Yeah, I think, Dan, one of the questions I want to ask you, I think it's related to a principle we talked about with King Alfred, but pursuit. So, winning the election is one thing. Ascending to a place of power is one thing. I've been encouraged to see, I think, Trump and his people doing the pursuit thing, meaning you have to not only take power, but then you have to use power a certain way. We've watched the left do this for my entire lifetime. Mm-hmm. Where, to Brian's point, we're going to punish our enemies, which can take any number of forms. But do you agree with pursuit? And particularly here we are, Christian pastors in one sphere, and we're encouraging, as Brian is, encouraging the state in this case to wield the sword of justice well. Do you think this is a moment where we have to pursue? And then if so, what are some of the other ways that this has to be done?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to frame the question, Eric, because just like with King Alfred learned over time, if you win a battle and you don't pursue victory, they will reorganize and they will destroy you.
Meaning chase your enemies down.
Chase them and cut them down in the field. Don't let them reorganize, harry them to the very end. And so it's interesting to compare that to the election, because winning the election seems like a great battle was won. And so what's happened in the past, though, is that we'd get some sort of movement and you find out that the promises are empty. There would be some Republican victory and they would have all of these promises based on their campaign. They would campaign to the right, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh,
The Tea
you're
Party.
just the Tea Party, lots of empty promises, lots of do nothing. And so,
Or maybe didn't even have the bureaucratic mechanisms to actually
Muscle.
affect change. The muscle.
the will. There's still the instinct to apologize, for injustice.
Yeah.
So if you break these cultural norms that have been forced down your throat, you still have to kind of say sorry about it. Sorry for noticing DEI. And that's gone. That's gone. And right now, I think what you're seeing is the principle of pursuit in action, because it's interesting. So the president, senators, most elected officials that I'm aware of, even military officers have to swear to protect the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think really what you're seeing with a lot of these executive orders, which we are going to pursue. That's what you're seeing. You could argue all day long about representative republic and government overreach or whatever it is. But what I see right now from the executive branch is the principle of pursuit against enemies foreign, which means like we're stopping foreign aid right now. We paused that. We're not going to be a part of the WHO, part of the Paris Climate Accord. We're not doing any of this garbage anymore. Secretary of State, the State Department, America First policy. We are for our American citizens. We're no longer trying to pander to all of these foreign interests to actually enrich them, because that's what's been happening. And that's we'll get into the tariffs discussion as well. But that's the argument for tariffs is that we have been enriching foreign nations while putting the burden on our own people. And so Trump is saying no more of that. The border wars, the border crisis, that's a foreign enemy, and stopping the invasion into our own country. And so deportations and everything like that, that's him doing his job as far as upholding, protecting the United States and the Constitution against foreign enemies. And then you have domestic enemies, which it's all the DEI stuff, giving preference to people who functionally aren't Americans. H-1B stuff, a lot of the preference in DEI hiring, which we've talked about on previous episodes. It was like, if you're just a white male Christian guy, you get a college degree, you are competing in a space where the point system that they use and the DEI hiring requirements automatically means you go to the bottom of the list. And so you do not have preference whatsoever. In fact, you are decentivized. They are decentivized to hire you. And so all of these things that they're doing, that the executive branch is doing right now, I think is the principle of pursuit, saying, no, we're not just going to wave our hand at the foreign stuff. We're going to stop foreign aid. We're going to protect our country. We're going to protect our borders. The Iron Dome stuff is primarily protection first. The development of an Iron Dome. I don't know if
borders
you guys saw that. Yeah, borders, all of that. We're going to protect our people, and we're going to protect our own people internally against internal enemies that are going to economically, especially, disadvantage our own American citizens. Oh, and plus, you can't scrub any information. Like, you can't control information anymore. People deserve to know the truth.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I think what we're seeing is the initial we won the battle and we're going to pursue and we're not going to let up.
Let's win the war.
And I think people are terrified on the left. And people, are you guys sick of winning? I'm not sick of winning.
I'm not sick of
it
winning.
feels so good.
We have a lot more winning that needs to be won.
Yes.
Well, and it brings up another question, because I think, okay, let's focus for a minute on, us as a media company on the New Christendom Press side. The Overton window has clearly shifted. We have this great opportunity. It seems like one of the dangers could be that you have a victory and then the Scottish nobility wants to march out and make a truce with the enemy. So you could see the temptation for a lot of people where, we won that fight, but, whether it's larger platforms or other people that would come in and say like, hey, let's maybe ease off on some stuff. We could kind of mainstream you or whatever. That could be a real danger. And I think part of that for us would be backing off the messaging that got us here, but others as well. Like, I would argue this isn't the moment to go soft.
No.
This is the moment to take the principle and like a spear or a pike, follow me, you thrust all the way through. Like, and you push to victory.
It reminds, I mean, there's many parallel types of situations where one would be tempted to back off before the moment of actual success. You know, if let's say that you've got some sin that you've been wrestling with in your life and the Spirit's convicted you of it, and you're really pushing against it. You take some new measures. You're trying to form some new habits and structures to help you repent of this sin that you've been walking in. And you start to see some victory, and you get 80% of it's clearing up, and you're really on your way. And then all of a sudden you go, man, I've been doing so good. I'm going to let the pedal off. The flesh is crying out. I'm going to let the pedal off. I'm going to take my foot off the pedal a little bit. And before you know it, all of your victories have been lost and then some. When an army is on the brink of breakthrough and they're like, we're about to make a hole in the enemy line, and we fought dearly and we've spilled blood and we're on the verge of victory. And then you go, oh, but the other side is really, they seem like they're hurting. Seems like we're hurting them.
We've actually seen this.
I'm trying to.
That's what I'm trying to.
That's what I'm actually attempting to do.
Bring in all the photos and the videos and reels of like crying immigrants.
Well, here's what happens. I think this is what happens in the novel theological apparatus sort of thing. You start taking ground. You notice the thing, like C.S. Lewis's, I bring it up all the time, the fire extinguishers during a flood instinct.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you've got the largest campaign in American history of making Americans hate themselves, and white Americans hate themselves, and white Christian men hate themselves. And you identify that, and you're starting to make progress, and you're about 80% of the way there. And then all of a sudden you go, there is you realize there's a real ditch here. People might go way too far and end up in some kind of sinful state where they fall in the opposite ditch. Because there's always an opposite ditch that you could fall into. Yeah. There's always an opposite error of whatever error you're in. But the instinct when you're 80% through to healing it to go, let's stop and focus a lot of our attention now on that other ditch for a little bit. No. You haven't won yet. You haven't made your breakthrough yet. You haven't had established walking in keeping with repentance with that huge issue. If you take your foot off the gas now and if you turn around and start counter signaling your own army with 80% of what you do, well, you've lost. You're not going to complete the victory. You're not going to make it through to the other side. And this is what the left has successfully done, is they've convinced the right to notice that, to feel this discomfort when they're about to win, and police themselves and get them to back off.
Well, even the evangelical messaging, right? Like Roe v. Wade gets overturned, and then all the pastors who are like, this isn't a moment to celebrate. It's a moment to weep. And you're like, absolutely not. I am going
Shut up.
I am going to celebrate a victory because it is a victory. And we're going to take that momentum and we're going to keep pushing through until there are no murdered babies in this country.
Well, and it's like, what if JD Vance, when he showed a crying Mexican being deported or whatever, Selena Gomez, and he's like, yeah, let me just take a minute. You're right, Margaret. Let me address my people, guys. We don't want to gloat. We want to make sure that we're compassionate, that we have empathy for these people. Like, I know it has to happen. We've got to do this deportations. It's going to be really hard for them, though. Like, everybody keep an open heart and an open mind. And instead he was like,
can we,
frankly, Margaret, I don't care what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the point isn't that JD Vance literally doesn't care about other people outside of America on some level. Like, JD Vance doesn't he doesn't want all Mexicans to die. JD Vance doesn't want Venezuela to descend into chaos and bloodshed. But what he's doing is he's saying, I'm not the vice president of Venezuela or Mexico. I'm the vice president of the United States of America.
You actually have a God-given responsibility to take care of your people.
And so my I shall not pity, with respect to performing my duty to protect the people that are in my charge to protect. And I have to do this.
Yeah.
And so you can't, this is the thing. You need to do both things. You need to have the absolute steel will to destroy and win and crush your enemies and destroy all of the apparatuses, all of the weapons that they've been wielding against your people and against the good. Yeah, you destroy all of those, and then you don't make the mistake. There is a point where you don't want to make the mistake that, for example, we made in World War II, the Civil War with Reconstruction era, Treaty of Versailles, where then you back your enemy into a corner and they can't. You make it impossible for them to live. Like that's another error that you can fall into. But you think about that after total victory. You think about that after total victory, and we're not even close. Ben, I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm concerned about you.
What are you concerned about?
Every time I see you, you have more and more Indigo Sundries products. I feel like you're overdoing it.
Dude, give me one example.
Dude, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Do you see, like, where did you even get this from?
What's the problem with having some soap on hand?
Ben, we're at work right now. There's
What,
gonna be,
you don't want to smoke it at work?
There's going to be no situation where you need Indigo Sundry soap at work.
Have you ever gotten sweaty in this basement?
Dude, yes. Every time we're filming, I look at you and I go, he's so handsome.
Well then, you're gonna need some soap so that you don't smell as bad.
Do you see what's happening to you? Like, how are you even? Are there do you have fairies that give you this?
Dude, what are you talking about?
Have you partnered
right
with the Fae?
No, I'm a stone cold Christian who likes soap.
Dude, wait. Is that calendula?
Oh, not so mad about it now, are you?
They make liquid soap now?
You didn't know that?
Dude, I didn't know that. Well,
They're
obviously
literally they're a sponsor of the show. You should know that.
I have duties and responsibilities. Not all of us can just be Indigo Sundry Maxing all the time.
Okay, well, since you didn't know that, I'm assuming you also didn't know that if you use their subscription plan, you'll get 10% off of your order.
10% off?
10%
Of
off
their already great prices?
I'm telling you.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, one of the things, I think you've kind of talked about these, but just to kind of clarify each one of them. So one ditch for evangelicals would be falling into the empathy game. And, instead of just being victorious and having the will and crushing enemies and all that, you would just say, which by the way is interesting because even like with, this is what lost Saul the kingdom, among other things, was he didn't follow God's command to crush the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
He let them live, and Samuel hacked Agag to pieces. But it becomes a point of you do actually have to finish the job. So there's that. There's the empathy ditch. The other ditch, though, I think that could be really easy in this time for a lot of evangelicals is to look at the country and to say, there are a lot of quote unquote normies or grill Americans in the big evangelical churches. Let's do two things. Let's water the message down. And then anything on the dissident right, quote unquote, that we term too far right, which by the way is really just the effective right. Those are the people getting things done. We don't necessarily attack them, but we poo-poo them. Yes, I remember when I was young and I had idealism, but that stuff is really just, I'm going to take this third road, this high road. I'm above this fray. I think that can also be really destructive because fundamentally what it's doing is taking the wind out of the sails. It's a discouragement ministry, even though it's kind of couched as not that. But I think that was a huge instinct with Tim Keller and with a lot of the kind of Gen X was just being contrarian to everything that's winning. And so we don't want to do that either. We just want to encourage people to keep fighting. I think this is the other point too. One other thing I'll say. This is probably in the purity spiraling form. Pete Hegseth gets the nomination. He gets cleared. Tiebreak vote goes to JD Vance, which is hilarious. He's up there with his family. Now, here's the situation. You have a guy who committed adultery in the past. There's a lot of sin. He has fully repented. His pastor has said he has repented. He's righted the wrongs. He has a healthy Christian family as best he can now. And he's pursuing the good of his family, his church, community, and country. He's got a crusader tat on his chest. And we look at that and we go, praise God, thank you for Pete Hegseth. And then I look at the comments from all the Christians underneath and they're like, well, which wife is this? The third one? And you're like, guys, this isn't the moment for that. Particularly when it's like, we do believe in repentance though, don't we? We do believe in these things. If you're going to go, and we see the same thing, the same tendency with the heroes of the Bible. When you have Samson and people are like, oh, what a scumbag, horrible. We can learn nothing from him. And then as we've often said, why is he in the Hall of Faith?
Wait, I've read Hebrews 11 and his name is right there.
Because does it mean you have to be perfect to be in the Hall of Faith?
Did the Holy Spirit not remember all of that stuff? Of course, the Holy Spirit remembered.
But I'm curious, what would you say to somebody who is tempted to do that thing? And any victory, they're going to find a fly in the ointment and say why it's not a real victory.
It actually, with Hegseth, the Zionism thing is another example of it, where they're like, oh, but he's a Zionist. And I'm like, yeah, let's be honest, guys. Right now, in this moment, would it have been possible to get a strong nationalist leader who wasn't a Zionist, who didn't signal strongly towards Zionism? Probably not.
No.
You couldn't have done it. There's a realpolitik level to this as well, where I think a great example is Trump. He ran on a kind of centrist abortion platform, but then the second he was in office, he continued, just like the first time around, he has acted and legislated as the most pro-life president in our lives, our lifetimes.
By the way, we talked about this in a past episode.
We did.
Where we said, hey, you guys have to have space for politicking. Like it's
Right.
an advantage to Trump at this moment to not run on a strong pro-life campaign. But just realize like what he's done in the past is that he's actually governed right.
Yeah.
on
When I
this
think when you're doing
issue.
politics, you can't be a perfectionist.
No, politics is part of it is the art of gaining power and then using that power for the good of the people and to reward your friends, punish your enemies, do good for your people. Like that's baked into what politics is. To your question about the fly in the ointment, I thought of that Zionism example as another one where I've posted things like, glad that Hegseth was confirmed and people like, well, I'm not because he's a huge Zionist and he'd have all of our children dying for Israel tomorrow. I'm like, look, guys, would you rather, this is the art of the political, would you rather have Pete Hegseth with all the things we said, who is still a Zionist, or a Zionist plus Kamala Harris's choice? There wasn't a choice on the ballot where it was like, you know what, we'd really like to get Eric Kahn. He's the SecDef now. Congratulations.
I mean, we would.
Sure, I'd vote for the guy, but he wasn't on the. He wasn't an option. So what it is, and the Gen X, like this is a Gen X
Next
thing.
time. Next time.
The Gen X instinct to counter signal and wet blanket. It's a contrarianism. It's a form of pride because anytime you have popularity, which is what you need in the political to win, you need a populist movement. You need a lot of people. So you're going to have like a lot of people that to you are disdainful because they're not quite perfect. They don't have the right stuff. They're dispy normie Zionists who love, Netanyahu. Okay. But they're also like being won more and more to American protectionism and America first and some of these things. If you have an instinct, the contrarianism instinct is a form of pride because it's a way of you feeling superior to literally everyone, where you're like, thank God I'm not like those leftists. And then in the next breath, thank God I'm also not like those normie Republican Trump voters. Thank God I'm not like, and by the time you're done thanking God for all the people you're not like, it's pretty much just you. It's pretty much just you.
Yeah.
And you're constantly trying to discourage everybody and play Machiavellianism against everybody. It's like, who are you? You're just a proud guy who doesn't want to be identified with anybody who's not perfectly pristine in your own eyes. I'm sorry, that's not how politics works. It's also not how life works. If you do this like in normal life, people will hate you and be annoyed by you constantly.
Facts.
Like they won't want it. They'll be like, you know what? I'm just not going to be around, Joe over there because he's constantly being hey, you guys want to go see this movie? I saw it was in theaters. Well, I heard the CGI was terrible. And okay, well, man, like maybe we should go out to, this restaurant. They use canola oil in their tortillas. And then you're like, well, fine, man, let's just stay home and play a board game. And you're like, what a waste of time. Like when we could be building something important. These guys are insufferable. I want to punch them in the throat.
Oh my word.
And we all have them in our lives.
I agree strongly. And that's a very masculine response, by the way. And something that I think is an undercurrent in all of this that you're talking about, the not having the will to pursue victory completely, like you talked about earlier with the 80% victory and not fully completing it. in lacking the will, I think this is something that Eric, you've talked about a lot on the Hard Men podcast, is that the destruction of masculinity over time is really the destruction of the will in a lot of ways, in not wanting to complete the victory. And so you start to see feminine or effeminate responses to a lot of the, that's what they're really trying to pull at, is I'm going to pull on this feminine, emotional heartstring that you have as to why you shouldn't actually complete victory. And so you back off. You have this feminine or effeminate instinct in pastors as to essentially wet blanket or take the wind out of the sails, because you want to be safe in a lot of ways. And there's dangers all over the place. That's why safety third, I think, is really good, because a lot of people have this safety first mentality where it's like, oh, but there's a ditch over there. What if we fall in the ditch? What if we sin? What if we go too far? Oh my word. We need to actually pull back from that. We need to stay in the middle. It's dangerous over there. Don't go over there, guys. Oh, what if we go too far? All of these things, it's disgustingly effeminate. It's actually ends up being, what you get is school marming or feminine nagging is really what's happening. It's the same thing as the mother who's helicopter parenting her little boys as they're trying to build a ramp that is definitely too big for their little bicycles, and they're not wearing their helmets. And mom's out there oh man, we need to get OSHA involved, and we need some regulations. What's the tensile strength of those screws that you're using? I don't even know. That ramp's just too big. Don't do it. Don't have fun. Go inside, read a book.
And you think about it, all the regulation that stops innovation, stops exploration. I don't think, the Saturn V. The only reason you could do that is it's a pre-OSHA, pre-EPA, pre-safety and regulation type thing. Because the reality is, if safety is the number one, if safety really is first, you'll never do anything.
Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a big bomb, but we're going to make it only blow up out one end so that it goes about 8,000 miles an hour straight up. We're going to put a couple guys on top of that. And then we're going to get a guy with a lighter. He's going to light the bottom of it. And they're going to go to the moon. All right? And everyone's like, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, because we got to beat the commies to the moon. Because if we don't get there, they ain't going to get there. And if we don't, so we got to. Can you imagine if there was one Karen involved in that process? She's
no.
First of all, we need to do an environmental impact study on what's going to happen when you use the water to cool the launch pad.
There's a reason when you're in control center and you watch the old videos of the Saturn V launching, every dude in there is chain smoking and drinking black coffee. They're watch this, boys. We're going to the moon. Yeah. But I think, and the other one is you'll see this in reels.
How are we going to get him back? Oh, we didn't think of it. No, they really did think of that. But
you see the reels
parachutes.
There was one I was watching recently. It was a 4-year-old. His dad bought him a mini bike, and they set him up on the mini bike, and he takes off, and the women are all screaming in horror as he careens into the fence. And all you hear in the background is his dad chuckling. He's like, I tell you what, that boy.
Yeah. It's I broke so many bones before age 12.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were constantly building jumps and wandering off into the, the whatever local woodlands we could find. And just Mom will be back. We're going to go dam up the creek. Make a swimming hole. She's like, all right, here's $2. Get a Jones Coast soda on the way so you're not hungry. It's today?
Oh, no.
And that was not that long ago. That was the 90s.
Well, it's interesting.
We're going to get back to that. In Trump's America, kids are going to dam up the local creek and drink a Jones Coast soda on the way. Mark my word.
That's what they're doing. One of the other things I will point out, I've thought a lot about this. Dan, you mentioned Hard Men podcast. In the words of Trump, it was a great show. Everybody loved that show. Nobody wanted me to stop that show. Hard Men podcast. One of the lessons I learned throughout all of that was you're going to have to push on issues that people absolutely hate you for. And now some of those issues, I think about 2020 when that was started, to talk about men and women competing in combat sports together, to talk about the WNBA and what that was doing to women, to talk about how women were losing their periods because they were competing so hard in athletic endeavors that were intentionally designed for men. To do those kinds of things, to talk about the feminization of the church. It was such hostile territory in 2020, which is just 5 years ago. And Brian and I talk about this all the time. I'll watch Twitter. Guys will follow you. Guys will unfollow you. I think it's just understanding, look, to a certain extent, some of us, not all of us, some of us play a prophetic role in speaking truth to issues that people hate. And that means you're going to be hated. And so I think one of the ways you win as a media company is saying, we're actually not going to take our foot off the gas. We're going to keep going on the same principled positions that we've been going on. We're not doing it to be shock jocks, but we are doing it because, look, if the last 5 years taught us anything, now some of those ideas are mainstream. Now, because of transgenderism and all of that, people are like, yeah, I don't know. I think men and women actually might be different, like physically in their natures. Like you can now say that and not get quite as much pushback and hate. And so I think it's like somebody has to be the tip of the spear. Even now, even in this moment, say the true things that are unpopular. You're going to have to say them about economics. You're going to have to say them about the Civil Rights Act. You're going to have to say them about affirmative action. You're going to have to say them about the New Deal. You're just going to have to count the cost and realize you may lose your head for it, but somebody has to do that work.
Yeah. And I think at that 80% where you've been brave and you have the last 20% to push, people are going to pressure you the hardest to apologize.
Yes.
And to denounce.
Or could you just tone it? You
must not apologize for things you didn't do wrong.
Could you
like
just
the
tone
J.D.
it down?
Vance interview.
Yeah.
That was what she was pushing for, was I'm sorry that this is really hard. And he didn't say that. He said, I don't care. I don't want these people in my country. And we must cultivate that, not apologizing for things that aren't wrong. You should apologize for things that you do wrong, but you should not apologize for something that is a principled stand that is in the right.
Yeah. And one other thing I will say, just as a tie-in, because it's spinning to my left here, taking stands for things you know are right. Zach Garris is under a lot of heat in the PCA this week as we record because of the things that he said that are common biblical positions.
Defending texts on basically what the Bible says about slavery. Zach is not ashamed of what the Bible says about slavery. And he's also not like some radical, he's not out there trying to acquire slaves, for example, from what I understand or anything like that. But again, the effeminate left instinct is trying to ham-fistedly smear him using psychologized, broad brush language like Zach Garris is out there defending slavery. Instead of the much more accurate, Zach Garris is out there defending the biblical texts concerning slavery in the Old and New Testament, because he's concerned with the word of God not being reviled. And so, I mean, he's under all sorts of heat.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big part. It would be a real temptation for a lot of people who are maybe, people who did well in the last 5 years, maybe you're ascendant, maybe you have more of a voice. And then you go, well, I was Zach's friend when it didn't cost me anything. But what about now? What about when, a large percentage of people out there hate the guy and want to see him destroyed? I just think it's going to take people being brave and courageous and saying, no, you're not going to do that to Zach. The crazy thing is when you talk to Zach, he's like one of the most measured, thoughtful. I mean, way more measured than I
was going to say. Like, for example,
I think the PCA would actually agree.
On the bar graph. Eric, let me just put it this way. Zach is, though under fire, still in the PCA. Eric, were he in the PCA,
would be kicked out.
Would have been kicked out, I don't know, sometime like, I would say it would happen in about 3 years ago.
In about instantaneous. Yes. Yeah, no, I've received many letters from pastors in the PCA about my tone and posture and the spirit of my engagement and you name it. But again, back to the point, I think not only crushing enemies, but standing by friends and realizing, like with Zach's book, this one in particular, not on biblical text on slavery or anything like that, but on sexuality. And I think why they're tied together is because, look, I mean, sexuality has been under attack. And one of the things that we have to press for is not to get our culture back to complementarianism in a novel 1980s theology. That's not my aim. It's not Gilderism. You know, I don't want my theology laced with Gilder. I want a biblical, robust, let's go back to the actual text and the historical Christian views on these and say, yeah, I don't care if Nancy Mace doesn't like it.
Oh, my wife let me drink a couple Dr. Peppers today.
Oh, good for you.
She let me go to the Lady Pastor Church.
My wife makes me eat bran cereal in the morning.
I'm sorry. Give me Googe, not Gilder.
Googe, not Gilder.
Googe, not Gilder.
Thank you. So anyway, I think just being courageous on these issues, continuing to press the attack, stand by friends. The other one I would say is in terms of like media sort of adjacent would be education. You know, the more you think about it, it's like, why couldn't all these university professors just be fired tomorrow? Because Brian brought up a really good point in our conversation about all this. These people are the factory for future Americans. And when I was recently for Hardman podcast episode looking at voting patterns, you know, like one of the number one determinants of whether somebody votes left or right and predominantly on the left if they went to college.
Yep.
And you see how that gets spun, right? It's like, oh, well, they're more educated.
When you're educated,
so
they're propagandized.
That's right.
This is, again, an example of a place where a Christian reforms, particularly within our reformed Christian world, might be tempted to purity spiral because they want to say, well, no, don't do that. We want to get rid of the public schools. We want to get rid of the public universities. We want to get rid of all this stuff. It's like the other day I posted about, a no-brainer policy today that's probably feasible and achievable would be the elimination of income tax for any lawfully married couple with 4 children or more that remain married, and then no more income tax or property taxes as long as that is true. They've had those children. And I knew immediately what was going to happen. The first 10 comments were going to be tismed out reformed people saying, nobody should pay income and property taxes. I'm like, look, this is a similar thing. Absolutely. Would I love for the entirety of America to have absolutely based Christian schools that everybody went to or homeschool? 100%.
But how do we get to that
politically,
point?
What we're talking about, though, right now is that it actually would be an achievable goal to oust all of the professors from these liberal university, liberal making machines and replace them with the old white guys that are all about to die in many key industries, by the way, the old white boomers who are keeping like key industries alive with their technical abilities and expertise, who were educated and trained before this stuff. Those guys are about to retire. We need to fire all the liberals, make them the professors. And then what will happen is that as long as that remains true, that we're actually retaking those culture making institutions, we will begin to make people again who are able to think clearly. And then we can make a lot more progress. Maybe even we could do something about the public schools. Maybe we could even. But politics is about things you can do today and doing the things you can do today and not letting your inability to do all the things you can't do today keep you from doing anything today. And just calling yourself a prophet standing outside of a thing and yelling at all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually
don't do that.
Involved in that process. By the way, this is a bit of an aside, but I think worthwhile. You always talk about, we were talking with this DEI, but when you walk into a plane and you see the old white pilot, you're like, we're going to be good. Somebody sent me this week, but it's a story in 1990, and I'll put this on Twitter so people can find it. In 1990, on a British Airways flight 5390, the windshield for the cockpit blew off.
Yeah, I've heard this story. It's
Flight
crazy.
attendant Niall Ogden. That's why we were mentioned in it. Ogden. Nigel Ogden happened to be in the cockpit. He grabbed the captain who was flying out of the window and he held onto his ankles for 15 minutes while the plane descended. They were like, well, we can't drop him because he might hit one of the engines. And plus he's our friend.
And he'll die.
It's
two negatives.
So
it's a lose-lose.
There's a picture on here of him, like the guy's just like holding on with dear life. It like separates his shoulders, holding on to him. He won't let go. They land and the guy survives. And you look at the photos and you're like, oh, it's a bunch of old white guys from like World War II.
I want to know the reason.
That's who I want running the country.
The reason the windshield came off in that instance, if memory serves, is that someone had used the wrong machine screw to secure the windscreen.
The wrong bolts.
It's like a very specific part, and they were like out of it, so they grabbed the next one. I just want to know who did that.
My guess would be like H1Bs.
I'm not going to predict. It was the 90s, so it was actually probably.
It probably
was probably like a 23-year-old kid, and he was like, I don't know.
But I think
this will
making
probably do
wholesale changes like that, really thinking through that societally, is really important. Dan, I want to ask you particularly about the tariff. The tariff. I know how you love economics. So this is where you get to spin a yarn about tariffs and just talking about why that would be such a colossal change. I'm not sure a lot of people, they're like, oh, I wouldn't have to pay income tax. There's actually a lot that goes into this.
Yes. So I do have actually experience with paying tariffs from importing goods that were manufactured in China, India.
It's actually China,
Vietnam,
Yep.
things like that. And the thing is, Trump, in his recent announcement where he said, I'm going to abolish income taxes and do tariffs, he mentioned, and Brian brought it up earlier, between 1870s and 1913 was one of the wealthiest periods in American history. Like he said, we had to hire people to manage all of the money because there was so much money coming in.
We also made things here.
Well, yes. So that's definitely part of it because it advantages. I mentioned that the company I'd worked for paid tariffs because we were importing goods. I was making hunting packs and wallets and leather goods and things like that. Anyway, so you pay those tariffs and it advantages companies to manufacture things in the United States because part of this tariff plan. So if you have up to 60% tariffs on products made in China, that's going to increase the cost of the goods tremendously. There was actually an equation we used. I'll make it as high level so it's not boring, but it was essentially you take the cost of manufacturing, of transportation, and of the tariffs, and you would 3x it. And that's kind of how you'd find your price.
So if it's 60%.
It's 60%. That means it's going to be very, very high. So people are saying like, oh, get ready for really high priced microwaves and things like that. It's like, well, yeah, that's definitely true. But what happens when a person says, you know what? Let's just make them here. Let's not pay the tariffs.
They used to do that.
Yeah.
Those
let's hire
Maytag
people
washing
here.
machines that used to run forever, like Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, that's great. And so it'll incentivize people to actually manufacture products here, which means you hire American workers for a better product that ends up being a lower cost than importing some junk from overseas, from some second or third world country. The other thing is that, okay, yeah, products will be expensive for a while. It definitely will be a pinch, but you're not paying the government anymore. They're not taking your money through taxation. You'll still have state taxes if you're in a state that does tax, but you won't be paying federal income taxes. And then not to mention, like as a business owner, when you're trying to figure out how to pay employees, all of a sudden you've got a lot more creative options in how you pay your employees because the entire game is taxes. How do you mitigate taxes for you as a business owner and for the employee so that it's maximally benefit for both parties? Some businesses don't care. They just like,
can I ask
we'll pay the taxes.
Dumb question?
Yeah.
Why did we go away from tariffs? Like, what's the incentive on that?
You know, that's really interesting because tariffs have been something that we've done for a very, very long time. Like we've never not had tariffs.
Right.
In recent history anyway. It was actually 1960s, post-World War II, because of world trade, we started decreasing our tariffs to encourage world trade so that there would be a lot more global economic activity. And so in order to make up for the income that was lost through those tariffs, they had to start taxing people more. And so you'll see an increase in taxation of the American people. Now, it's not just straight income taxes. That's the thing to remember. There are other things like inflation, that will also is a hidden tax in order to feed the ever-growing government and to feed that beast. And the thing is, what's really interesting about a tariff is it's based on mutually beneficial economic activity. Right? There will be people that will pay 60% tariffs in order to get products here because it's mutually beneficial for all parties involved, but not with income taxes. That's not a mutually beneficial activity because ultimately you're forcing your own citizens to pay to feed the government beast. That's not an advantage to both parties. It's essentially just theft because you've got guns pointed at your own people saying, we've increased the taxes because we decided to, and so you must pay us. Whereas tariffs are a voluntary activity that are mutually beneficial. And so anyway, all that to say, like, just think about the ramifications of that. You have more money in your pocket, right? Because you don't have to pay as much in taxes. You can freely choose what products you want. If you want something that's made overseas, you'll pay extra for it, but you voluntarily enter into that agreement that helps this tariff, thing continue to function. There will be more American jobs because it will be advantage to companies to produce products in the United States because they don't have to pay tariffs. You get a competitive advantage in this global economic environment because you can avoid tariffs.
When it seems like that there would be a cascading effect, meaning, okay, if take the average American, grill American, if he can find a quality job, he pays less taxes, and he's then more likely to start a family.
Yes.
He's more likely to have more children. And then you solve a lot, the whole thing like, well, America's a dying population, so we need to bring in migrants. And you're like, no, you need to promote natalism.
A good example of this in practice with some real numbers would be take the U.S. steel industry. In the 1940s and the 50s, the U.S. steel industry employed about 700,000 Americans. And they were high, typically good jobs. You could raise a family on a lot of these jobs in the steel industry. And keep in mind, that's 700,000 with the population in 1950s levels.
Yeah.
Today, the U.S. steel industry employs about 140,000 people. And if you were to look at that time period versus now, we dominated the global steel market in many ways during this period. If you looked at the top 15 steel companies globally today and asked the question, China. How many of them are American companies? The answer would be 0. 9 of them are Chinese companies. Several of them are Japanese, one South Korean. America doesn't even hit until the 16th largest steel company. So that's just one example.
Yeah, it's actually Nucor down the road.
Even like early in American history, there were economists who were not generally pro-tariff, like Adam Smith. He wrote The Wealth of Nations. But even Adam Smith understood the value of tariffs in a way that I think we have to understand Trump is using them also. Adam Smith said that there were 2 instances when tariffs were important for a nation. One would be in protecting industries critical to the defense of the nation. So if there's something that your nation needs to make in order to be able to wage war and protect itself, use tariffs to protect yourself from, let's say, a company like, or a nation like China, intentionally subsidizing an industry to make it artificially cheap for their companies to compete.
So they can control it.
In order to intentionally close down, it's economic warfare, to remove the ability of your home nation to, steel is a good example. You cannot fight wars without steel. You can't have aircraft carriers made without steel, fighter planes, drone. You can't do anything without steel, right? So one, he would say tariffs are good if they protect domestic industries essential for defense. And then 2, tariff, and this is Trump, classic Trump. You use tariffs when another country is tariffing you. You mirror them. You don't let them do this thing to you. You fight the tariff war there. And so we also have to understand that, and we've already seen this in 1 week of Trump being in office, is that tariffs are another weapon in the hand of the executive leadership of a country to wage economic warfare and asymmetrical warfare. So when a country says, like Colombia, I'm not going to land, I'm not going to let your migrant repatriation flights land, then Trump says, congratulations, Colombian coffee now has a 40% tariff. And your entire, if keep it up and I'll make it 50. And the next one that doesn't land is going to be 55. And oh, look, those Colombian hats that you like so much, those are American now. Like Trump loves negotiation and he gets negotiation. So some of the strategy with tariffs isn't even to invoke a permanent 50% tariff on a country forever. It's to equal the playing field. Tom Clancy even wrote a book called Debt of Honor it's part of the Jack Ryan series, one of my favorite like military thriller series. You should go check it out if you haven't read it. Patriot Games is the first one.
I just
Some
first
of
of all
All
just
Fears, Red
appreciate
October.
how masculine that reading interest is.
Oh, it's such a good.
I mean,
I'm listening to Patriot Games for about the 30th time right now. There's a book though, Debt of Honor, and it's basically set where Clancy, and he's known for his hyper realistic military and economic. So when he has a detail in a book, it's not, he didn't make it up. He probably like sat down with a submariner in the U.S. Navy and like understood the Ohio class of submarines, for example. But the idea is that America gets into a trade war with Japan, and America says, okay, Japan, we're going to enact this new policy where we mirror your tariffs. So if you're tariffing American goods at 40%, which they hadn't been, America hadn't been reciprocating that, whatever your tariff is, automatically our tariff matches it. And the point was that in that plot, the Japanese automotive industry was going to suffer greatly because of this, and the US automotive manufacturing was going to greatly benefit. So the goal isn't necessarily, I think, for Trump. I don't think he's trying to permanently tariff everything at those levels. He's leveraging negotiations. In his first term, Trump renegotiated, I mean, like the US-Mexico tariff agreement from 1994 that was negotiated, I think, under Clinton. He renegotiated in his first term. He renegotiated a George W. Bush, US-South Korea tariff agreement that was like a 2012 or 2004 tariff agreement. He renegotiated that in his first term. So Trump has done this before. NAFTA is a good example of like one where we gave the farm away and allowed our nation to be plundered of its ability to manufacture. So some people are thinking just like, oh, it's going to make goods more expensive and so it's bad. And what they're not thinking of is what happens when you give all of the ability to manufacture critical components to national defense to Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, Japan, Mexico, Canada. Well, all of a sudden, the leverage that China has over American politics is devastating.
Yeah.
Absolutely devastating.
I think there's another aspect that maybe I haven't really considered or read much on, but think about the way that people use money and income right now. You have to hide, if you are in a certain tax bracket, you're advantaged to hide your money or evade a tax advantage into 401k accounts. And it's something that, Brian, you tweeted on at one point with the stock market and globalism and the global economy and everything like that, how it keeps being fed. Mm-hmm. What happens when people that are, middle upper class don't have to put as much money as possible in the stock market to be tax advantaged, and they have more free money to actually invest and build things here and to spend money here and to do whatever they want? I mean, the ramifications, though, like you said, are...
They cascade. One of the dangers of tariffs, because there's dangers to this plan. There is no meaningful thing that Trump can do to accomplish that is not tremendously difficult and full of risk. People just have to understand that. For example, to really solve our American debt crisis and our tax crisis, we have to get rid of, and I mean, Social Security, massive government spending. There's no free lunch. So it's uphill all the way. Imagine that in this scenario, like the how Trump sells it is not 100% like real world accurate. Let's say that we're funding the US government entirely from tariffs or mostly from tariffs. And we have a 60% tariff on Chinese goods. And then, well, hang on. Then what happens when you go to war with China and all the money you were making from Chinese tariffs go to zero because you're not trading with them at all? France was Germany's biggest trading partner the day before they invaded France. So you have to understand that the result then would be massive inflationary money printing to fund a war effort without that source of income. Trump's not an idiot. He knows all of this. You have to back up and say the thing Trump's saying he's trying to accomplish is actually partly in play, but there's also things he's trying to accomplish that are more strategic negotiation, national interest goals. And he's been doing this for decades and decades in the business world. He did it in his first term. So a lot of this, it's kind of like the example of him running more centrist on abortion, but then legislating and acting already in the first week, much more pro-life. You have to understand the strategic nature of Trump's policy making and his executive leadership. He usually has an aim that he's not telling you with a policy. that is a good aim a lot of the time that we would agree with, but it's not transparent right away.
Right.
He's not going to tell you, because that would be to give away all of his. He wants to leave them guessing a little bit, to say, you don't even know what I'm trying to do, China, right?
Yeah, and I think too, like Pat Buchanan brought this up, but he said pretty much a nation in decline is a nation that is importing more than it's exporting.
It's actually one of the ways that Franco turned Spain around, because they were a second world country. They were not doing well. And so part of his initiatives were to increase agriculture and manufacturing and everything within the country, so they wouldn't have to import everything. And it just so happened to turn out that when they went to war, when there was global war and they didn't really involve themselves, they were producing their own goods. They were actually the ones that were exporting goods, and they entered into the golden age of Spain.
Yeah.
So there's been that talk thrown around a lot as well. The golden
what?
age of the United States.
You know what's funny is that if you that's a great measure too. By the end of today, our trade deficit with China for today will be about $1 billion, meaning that we have bought $1 billion more goods from China today than they have bought from America. It's like $360 to $400 billion annually. Now, if you could change that equation, this is why it matters so much. You're not talking about small change. You're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars being invested into American manufacturing ability and business. Now, this is a mindset change that needs to happen for the American people. This is an encouragement actually for I would say for us and for Americans to be thinking through, is that we need to get away from what NAFTA trained us to think like, which is, how can I get this as cheaply as possible? How can I get whatever thing I want as cheaply as humanly possible? That desire is not properly aligned with national self-interest. Now, it doesn't mean that you want to pay exorbitant amounts for bad stuff. That's not the goal. It should mean something that something is made in America. That should mean it's great. It's better quality. But it's also going to mean,
it did used to mean that.
Even at the end of the whole process, it might mean that you do pay more for a thing. But would you rather pay more for a good that was made in America, that employed your countrymen, that was made excellently, that maintained your national sovereignty in its manufacturing and war-making capability, defended your culture? And but I paid 18% more for my washer. Yeah, but will your washer last more than 2 years?
Well, that's the crazy thing, because
will it employ your kinsmen?
I was thinking about this with, my dad. He has tools, electric tools, in his garage, and I'm like, what is that tool? It doesn't even have like a label on it. It's like an old Black & Decker or something from like the 50s or 60s. And he's like, well, this is it was my grandpa's that he passed down to my dad. I'm like, that thing still works. I've been through, like, even if you buy the high-end tools today, they're junk. It's cool. They've got a lot of features, whatever. But the washing machines, you can go to a lot of like the boomers' homes, like grandparents, and they've still got microwaves from the 50s that still work, and ovens and washing machines that still work.
Yeah.
And we're buying, $2,000 Samsung oven that'll be dead in 5 years.
Yeah, the igniter is a 2-year igniter, and the knob is a 3-year knob, and it's like everything is junk, and everything enriches our enemies. Mm-hmm. And we need to get away from that, and we will not get away from that unless we start thinking in terms of our maximal self-interest and not just our minimal self-interest. Our minimal self-interest is like that calculation of, how can I get this thing the cheapest possible? And our maximal self-interest is, how can I pay a price that I can afford for this item, and that item be great and actually affect the good of my kinsmen, the good of my nation, the good of our national sovereignty. And when we start doing that, we're going from thinking about me to thinking about we, thinking about us as a nation, thinking about your people.
I think it also changes too, if you do away with multiculturalism, you promote natalism, and then you start to realize that a nation is just an extended family. And then you start thinking about things like, well, Granddad works at the Ford plant where the Ford trucks are built. There used to be a thing where people, especially in the Midwest, where it's like, if you lived in Kentucky, the Ford truck plant's there. So people were like, you buy a Ford, that's our people.
Yeah.
That has almost died out completely. You remember the old Toby Keith song, Made in America? Like, nobody cares anymore because everything is like just junk made from wherever. But think
Or
about
it's
this.
assembled in the US.
Think
It's not
about
even made
2020.
here.
They shut down the entire economy. You couldn't buy a new pickup. Why? Because you couldn't get the chips.
Yeah,
'Cause they're
all
not made here.
They're all made in Taiwan.
And they can make the chips here. They could do that.
Yeah, it takes time to spool up manufacturing. Actually, Isaac at T-Rex Arms did a couple posts and things about, because they're into manufacturing. They actually make things. And he did a post that was comparing or linked to it or something. Like, if I'm an American manufacturer, I need this part made of steel, and I get a quote from China and America. The point was that the Chinese part was cheaper and it was faster, and they manufactured it in a totally different way than the American company was going to. And part of the point was that, yeah, like American companies really do need to compete, like they need to be able to compete on that. But a lot of people pointed out, he might have pointed out, that the hidden factor that's going on in that transaction is that the Communist Party in China is taking state money and subsidizing steel. So when the steel company in China buys steel, they're paying a fourth or a third of what an American company is paying just to get the steel.
And also,
why
the way
are they
treat,
doing that?
The way they treat their workers.
Well, they're doing that not out of the goodness of their heart.
Horrible.
They're not like, we just want our national steel company to do well. No, they're doing it because they're saying, we want communist China crush America. And we have to be like, well, am I going to help? Or am I going to not help?
Yeah.
Right? So there's none of this should minimize the fact that there's massive complexity in global supply chains that did exist in 1910. Nobody would dispute that. That's just a fact. But we can't let the fact that these are difficult things keep us from doing anything, keep us from starting to walk back up the hill.
You know what's really interesting about that point? China subsidizing the steel industry is that the government is actually benefiting their own workers. Well, I mean, to a degree. I've been to factories in China.
Yeah.
They're not that benefited, but the companies are benefited. Right. Whereas in the United States, through regulations and especially through energy, we've been disadvantaged to compete in this global marketplace.
Well, so this actually is a segue to the last thing I want to talk about. Beautiful segue, Dan. But when you look at energy, why is it so important? You know, my dad worked in the coal industry his whole life in energy. And he said, you know, it's crazy. I'd watch all these coal mines get shut down, which would kill local economies, kill local places. That's one side of it. But he said, you know, the reason California is having blackouts is because the regulation on building new power plants is so insane that it's not economically worth it to go through the hoop. So they're just going to run out of power. And I think Trump was right to say there's an energy crisis. One other thing I'll point to, my dad was working for Caterpillar recently. And he said, we were building transformers for, you know, major entities, hospitals, whatever. You have to have transformers and then generators and stuff like that. And he said, you know, we were trying to upgrade a lot of these hospitals and other entities since 2000. China is the one who builds the transformers. There was like a 3 to 5 year wait on parts. So he's like, if I order something now for generator parts or different components that they make, 3-year wait. So then you think about what happens if somebody attacks the U.S. energy grid.
Oh, luckily we have a strategic reserve of transformers. Did you notice? We really do. Oh, wait. Biden sent all of them to Ukraine about 9 months ago.
Interesting.
Did you know that? Legitimately.
I did not know that.
So
That's
transformers, insane. These are infrastructure critical components that cannot be fast tracked. They are genuinely on, like Michael Foster works in this industry. And he had a post about this, you know, a while ago where like Tesla's building a big factory and pretty much the company Michael worked for could dictate prices. They could say, I know 2 years ago we said this transformer was going to be, you know, $100,000. It's 1.5 million now, or it's $300,000 now. And you can either have it in 9 months from us, or you can have it in 5 years from, which do you want? We had a strategic reserve of transformers. It wasn't a lot. For our military and for our critical infrastructure, Biden literally sent them and gave them to Ukraine. And
I will help build gallows.
The reason we found out about this is because then all of the flooding and everything happened in Appalachia, and a bunch of transformers are blown, and FEMA and these entities that are they tax us to oblivion. And the least they're supposed to do is come in and help with these kinds of national emergencies. And they said, sorry, gave them to Ukraine.
Yeah, and this is the insanity.
We needed them for butt sex in Ukraine. I'm serious. That's what it is. It's like,
just don't know what to say.
that's what we need them for. I'm sorry, we had to defend globo homo in Ukraine. There's the more politically correct. See, guys, they're canceling me here. They're putting political pressure on me.
But that literally is the thing, is like, you think about the misplacing of priorities, that you're betraying your own people who footed the bill. You're not taking care of them. And then you're taking care of Ukraine. I mean, it's the Trump. I know this is changing, but somebody had asked Trump about this they said at one of his, executive order signings. Well, what do you think is going to happen in Israel, Palestine? He's like, I don't know. None of my business. It's none of our business. It's not America.
Yeah, what is that? A city in where is that? I haven't heard of that. Was it in Colorado? Israel? I haven't heard.
But he basically signaled like, hey, Israel, Palestine, those people got to work it out. That's their neighborhood. And you see the shift now in saying we need to secure our border. We need to take care of we have real problems here.
So energy, it's really interesting. Energy is one of the primary means in which you could destabilize a country. You flood it with immigrants, and then you actually restrict energy. And I'll tell you why that is. So Alex Epstein.
You think it was intentional?
Which part?
All that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's 100% intentional. I mean, all of the Green New Deal stuff, all of the regulations,
Paris
the
Accords.
Inability to have really cheap and accessible energy. Alex Epstein, in his book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, really interesting. He says the biggest differentiator between third and second world countries and second and first world countries is energy. Mm-hmm. And he gives an example. In a third world country, they don't have incubators for children that are born premature. Like those babies die.
Yeah.
Because they cannot run generators all the time. They don't have consistent flows of electricity. Like the standard of living is low. Infant mortality rates raise. You don't have the ability to actually function as a society if you don't have reliable and cheap energy. And fossil fuels are the way that you actually do that. And so if you wanted to revert a first world country into the second world, one of the ways that you would do that is by restricting cheap and accessible energy. Because think about it this way. If you own a business and all of a sudden energy costs go up, nothing about your business has really fundamentally changed. The nature of your product hasn't changed. The manufacturing process hasn't changed. Your material costs go up. The transportation costs go up. You have to still run your plant, all of your manufacturing. If you've got a few thousand employees, think about all of the equipment, the lights, like everything that you have to run. All of that goes up in price. And then you have a completed product that you then have to transport to whatever location in which you're distributing it. So that whole process means it eats into your profitability. And what doesn't go up as a cost during that time is payroll. People don't make more money. In fact, they have to drive, commute home, and they have to buy other stuff, food and things like that that go up. Income. They have less disposable income. And so a business, they look at their bottom line and they're like, our margins are really thin and energy prices just went up. What is the thing that we actually can control the costs of? Payroll.
So we lay people off.
We lay people off in order to make,
or we
survive as a business.
Remote workers in India.
Yeah, that's right. And so this is why when Trump was asked this question during the campaign a while ago, maybe you guys remember this. It was like, I'm a single mom, I'm trying to provide for my family. How in Trump's economy will I be able to survive? And he said energy costs. That was what he said. At first it's like, oh man, you would think government subsidies or some government welfare program, social welfare program. And he said energy costs. And here's why. And then he goes on about how, essentially what I just talked about, how keeping energy costs low makes everything else more affordable. It actually increases innovation. Think about that warehouse or that manufacturing plant. And they have the opportunity to innovate the manufacturing of their product with new equipment and new techniques and everything like that. But if they're always combating this razor thin margin because of their increased energy prices, their research and development budget goes to nothing. Like they're not going to innovate. They're going to survive. And that's how you really destabilize an economy and a people. is by making it so that people have to choose between their countrymen and surviving.
And you can see some of this even in our fossil fuels policy is the most obvious. You can see it in our nuclear policy as well. I mean, nuclear energy is a no-brainer. We should be building nuclear power plants. Regulation is what makes them billions of dollars, not the actual cost of making them. People can say, well, what about security surrounding fissile material or nuclear material? Okay, then we build thorium nuclear plants that don't produce fissile material. I think it's thorium. We already have the technology to solve many of these problems. It already exists. What's keeping us from solving them is bureaucracy. It's communism, more or less. It's just people that are not, they hate you. They want to destroy your country to enrich themselves. Tale as old as time.
By the way, the whole environmental thing with using fossil fuels is just, it drives me crazy. It's so dumb. There's actually a thing, you should look it up. It's called global greening. Global greening. Mm-hmm. They've noticed this since the 1980s with the use of fossil fuels and everything like that. What happens when you burn oil or coal or whatever? It releases carbon into the atmosphere. What is everything on Earth made of?
Carbon.
Carbon, which has resulted in a incredible, unprecedented increase in food production worldwide because of this great global greening, because of the extra carbon that is available for plants to actually use to grow. I mean, and so we're saying like, oh, we're going to cut carbon emissions when it's the very thing that's actually feeding the corn and the soybeans.
So when I drive down the road and I roll coal, I'm actually helping.
You're helping the environment.
Well, okay.
I am the most environmental person.
Hang on. No,
there are pollutants and there are bad
and
things.
There's even, but you do see like,
but it's good.
There are like real Christian conservatism is actually good at environmentalism. It's not fake environmentalism. So we should be thinking about things like the way that we treat animals that we use for food, and we should be thinking about
whether we use
atrazine.
Actually, water is really, really important.
Yeah.
So that was something that we've definitely failed
especially
at in
primary
the past.
Water.
Well, if we can get to the primary water deep below the Earth's crust,
can we wrap this up?
But
I mean, for that reason, I'm out.
For the purposes of time, I'm not going to go deep on primary water, but just know that both oil and water are being created deep in the Earth's mantle.
It's really interesting. Actually, I looked at a study. They found that one of the most profitable ways to access oil is to go to old wells that had dried up because they're refilling.
Yeah, this is.
How do they get more dinosaur bones in there?
This is an evolutionary psyop that all this stuff is dinosaur bones and like old flora and fauna that is
even
long
the name
decomposed.
fossil fuels. Eric told me I didn't know people legitimately believed that it was fossil fuels, as in like old.
I just said pseudoscience, according to a lot of people. It's the abiogenetic oil idea that oil is not a biological thing, but it's actually made in chemical processes in the earth. God basically gave us. He was like, "Look, here you go.
Here's some oil.
Have some fun."
It's great.
And the thing is, he did
Black
this like
gold.
There's like
Texas tea.
There's like 50 different things that God did that we can make energy with. I've said this before, probably on Haunted Cosmos, but we're going to get to the point where we're going to be able to tap into energy directly from matter and from the vacuum. Like the reason that a bomb made with an orange-sized globe of plutonium or fissile material, when turned into a two-stage hydrogen weapon, a fusion weapon, or a trigger weapon, can 100 kiloton, 100 megaton type of bombs, is because they're converting that mass into pure energy equals MC squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So we're so inefficient, even in nuclear weapons, they're only converting a tiny percentage of that globe of plutonium into energy. Do you know what would happen if you could convert a single raisin into pure energy?
Oh, it like powers New York for days.
You could power New York City. It's like days or weeks. The entire city.
Are you talking about nuclear fission?
No, I'm just talking about all of the stuff, the
energy that's
in a raisin. Mm-hmm. You could, not even fissile material. Like if you could purely convert fissile material into energy, I mean, you could just destroy the earth with a beach ball.
Well, they actually already figured this out. I don't know if you knew this, but Doc Brown and Back to the Future
Yeah, I mean, Eric, fill us in. My dad.
I didn't know that was a documentary. I was confused. It makes a lot more sense now.
See my X feed for more insight.
My dad is an ICBM guy. He's an electrical engineer. He worked in ICBMs for like 40 years. And so I was always interested in this stuff. Like my 6th grade history fair project was about like Bohr and the Manhattan Project and a lot of this stuff. It's always fascinated me. But even as like a 7th grader, it makes you realize that it's so obvious. Oh, the government hates us. Like they could fix all of these fake energy problems in like 3 years if they wanted. They would just do like they would drill. They would remove all this fake limitations on our oil production and usage. They would make nuclear energy plants and like solar power is amazing too. That's how a tree turns CO2 into carbon. It like blow torches the carbon off of the CO2 and makes itself out of that, which is crazy. But we wouldn't even need solar technology as it currently exists to solve our energy or wind or all these like super inefficient guys. We have everything we need. The government just hates you.
Drill, baby, drill.
It's so obvious.
The government did hate us.
Like a 7th grader could figure this out.
Well, you didn't see my 7th grade report card, but some 7th graders. But no, I think about even a place like Ogden and how many people are employed in the global homo wars and really expensive missile programs, for Ukraine or whatever. And then you think, well, these are brilliant people.
Yeah, they could figure something out.
I'm sure if they put them to work in something that actually would benefit America, they could, and that would be really good. Brian, I want to kind of give you just the charge, take us home, land the plane.
Okay, yeah.
Pretend though, when I say land the plane,
yeah,
you're flying, we're landing, but I'm holding Dan's ankles as he's flown out of the windshield.
You'd let me go.
So you're saying take my time.
Take my time.
Okay,
Man.
guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the King's Hall. Let me leave you with this. The elites don't want you to know this. You can build your own nuclear power plant in your house. I have 3 nuclear power. I'm just kidding.
People have done that before.
I don't.
Do you read stories on this?
Yeah, people have
There was
done.
a guy who
like
he
in
actually-
a shed.
In his shed.
Yes.
Because everybody around him was getting nuclear poisoning.
Well,
it was radiation poisoning.
He didn't quite handle some of the problems.
I do realize that, and I think everybody realizes.
Let
that.
me close
Anyway.
with this.
Last name Kaczynski.
Disregard what I and Eric and Dan just said. No, I think that this is the theme that we're going to be hitting in the conference. You're going to hear this a lot in King's Hall in the coming months. We think it's one of the most important themes for America is recover the American will to greatness. Like you can just go like things, do things, build things. You can go pursue greatness, not in competition with the greatness and glory of God, but in thankfulness for the gifts that he's put into your hands. So go and build, go and put safety third. Like it's on the list, but it's third. It's not first. Take a risk, build a business, do the thing, like do it wisely, do it with good counsel. But America is not going to be retaken by one president at the top fixing everything for us. We have room to maneuver. We have permission to go and be great and do these things. But you need to take that permission and go and run with it. So just feel the wind in your sails. You're not fighting against it. You're not tacking against a 60-mile-an-hour headwind anymore. The wind is behind you. And so take advantage of this time. Go take some ground. Keep your foot on the gas pedal. Don't slow down. And if you've been, wallowing in black pill, nothing ever happens, it's all bad, I'm going to purity spiral. Can you please knock it off and quit being annoying? And just go and do something meaningful with your life. So thank you for listening to this episode of the King's Hall podcast. Vincit quisa vincit. He conquers who conquers himself. Not only will we see you next time, but we will see you at newchristianandpress.com/2025, June 12th to the 14th here in Ogden, where we're going to have a great time at our Safety Third conference. Catch you guys next time.
Buenas noches.